Just a reminder, you can catch me recording this podcast live on AMP. AMP is a new live radio app that lets you call in and chat with me in person while recording. Get the app on Apple's App Store and make sure you follow me at John Middlekauff to get notified when I go live. What is going on, everybody? John Middlekauff, 3 and Out Podcast. Subscribe wherever you listen. Apple, Spotify. You're watching this on YouTube. Smash that like button. Comment below in the comment section. And subscribe to our page. Appreciate everyone that listens or watches all of our content. It's U.S. Open week. As you can see, I'm wearing Go Low. It's my golf podcast on the 3 and Out feed. We have a deal because it's the U.S. Open. If you go to the Volumes merch store, thevolume.com, search merch, you can get this Go Low polo. And when you use the promo code OPEN23, you'll get half off one of these trucker hats. Got a white one, got a blue one. They look good. So if you want Go Low merch, I'm rocking it. You should too. Go to the Volume store, type in the promo code OPEN23, get a polo, get half off a hat. Also, I need you to go to your smartphone and download the Gametime app. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in America. Also happens to be the official ticketing app of this podcast. You want to go to a baseball game this summer? You want to go to a football game this fall? You want to go to a concert? You want to go to a comedy show? Here's what I need you to do. I need you to type in the promo code JOHN, it's my name, John, and you'll get $20 off any pair of tickets. Very easy to do. Promo code John. Download the Gametime app. First-time users get $20 off anything you want. Concerts, comedy shows, games. Get on it and do it fast. This is going to be a mailbag-heavy podcast. This is the time of year where I just saw Doug Pederson. He told all of his veteran players, no mandatory minicamp. You guys go home. I saw on Instagram, Deebo Samuel gave some peace signs. See you guys at training camp. This is most teams now, and most veteran players are off and running, having a good time. Now, I also think one theory I have, I've been going to these mini camps and off-season activities for over a decade. They have got less and less strenuous and intense. I don't think they've ever been probably less physically taxing than they are in 2023, and that will continue. I also think because of the money on the line, and a lot of these players, I mean, such a large percentage of players come from obviously not just Division I programs, Power 5 level programs. These guys are used to being pretty locked and loaded, 365, training on their own, staying in shape. Because for a long period of time in pro sports, right in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, probably even the 90s, you would just show up. That's when you would get in shape at training camp. And I think that is just dramatically different. Now, it probably has its positives and negatives, right? You would stay in physical shape in terms of playing football in the offseason. Maybe you were less inclined to get injured. I can't prove that, but I do think there is some merit to that, especially in training camp when you're not really tackling. But I think from a standpoint of a lot of teams not worrying about guys working too hard in terms of on the practice field, because these guys are in pretty good shape now. And these guys pay so much money because their bodies yield them so much for contracts, right? And getting a second contract in the NFL now is so lucrative. I do wonder if guys are just much more disciplined now. Even if you're not the most disciplined human, it's worth it for you to pay your trainers, throughout the offseason, during OTAs. And I just wonder if coaches clearly by their actions sending guys home aren't as worried about like keeping them in shape right up until the last day that I can see them for their 30 days off, that they feel pretty confident the guys will, continue to work out, stay in tip-top shape, and be ready to roll when it's time. Let's dive into the mailbag. Start with Ramel. Mailbag is just my name. At John Middlekauff, Instagram, DMs wide open. Recently discovered your podcast. Love your work. Like this guy already. My question is, as someone who is somewhere between a hardcore and casual of the NFL, I've never quite understood exactly what a head coach's responsibility when they have both an offensive and defensive coordinator and a special teams coach on the team. Can you break that down? I think that's a pretty good question. In my time in the NFL, Andy Reid, Actually, I guess when I was with him with the Eagles, Marty Morningwig called plays, though he was pretty involved. When I was at Fresno State with Pat Hill, he didn't do anything. He didn't call the plays on offense, and he was an offensive guy, so he had nothing to do with the defense. I think a huge role when you are a John Harbaugh, a Mike Tomlin, I think Pete Carroll plays this, though. I think he's pretty heavily involved with the defense. I think Jim Harbaugh played this role when he was with the NFL, in the NFL, and now even at Michigan, is motivation and writing your coaches to give them organizational, philosophical beliefs on a weekly basis. I think Bill Belichick clearly does this too, to have ideas, of what we want to do to attack certain teams depending on the week. I think team meetings and the direction of your team, the motivation of individuals, a huge thing Bill Walsh always did. Now, Bill Walsh was the play caller, was ride his assistant coaches really hard. Because if you rode the position coaches hard, especially in front of the players, that would incentivize them to try to do better because they didn't want to let down that guy. There is a lot of, I don't want to say busy work, but just in terms of working hand in hand with your GM. I mean, you're dealing with things from what time your plane should leave, what your meals are, a lot of, I don't want to say micromanaging, but you're doing a lot of things at the top of the food chain that coordinators just don't have to worry about. Depending on your team, when guys get in trouble, when guys get injured, dealing with your GM of, who we're going to bring up, who we're going to put down on a weekly basis. Most coordinators just deal with who do I have to deal with this week in terms of who am I going to get up or down on game day, who is healthy, and who are we playing, and just devise a game plan. Where I think head coaches are much more worried about the message to the team that aren't calling plays on a given week. If you've played poorly or played well the previous week, how to motivate or how to maintain that level of play. A practice schedule given on who you're going to play, what your travel schedule is the following week. A lot of schedule making when you're the head coach. And then you have to, if you're not calling the plays, you have to find time, a good one, to watch a lot of film on your opponent, to know what you're talking about with your players and definitely your position coaches and your coordinators. So I think it probably depends on the team. And I do ultimately think, even if you are quote unquote, Mike Tomlin's a good example. I bet he spends a lot of time with his defensive coordinators and just the defensive side of the ball. That's kind of who he is at his core, right? Now, I also would imagine he spends time with people on his offense that just either needs positive reinforcement, that needs to be ridden a little harder. I mean, a huge part of football, like probably a lot of professions, motivation, motivating your guys, staying on your guys, riding your guys, getting the most out of them, pushing them to places that they don't even see possible. But every single coach in the NFL that's a head coach that's not a play caller does have a side of the ball that's an expertise, right? So you're just going to lean that side because that's what you know best, right? If you're the CEO, but you came up as the sales guy or the marketing guy or whatever guy, you're going to lean kind of with that side of the business because that's what you're most comfortable with. So, I mean, there are probably a lot of things that I've never been an NFL head coach or a college head coach that doesn't call plays. But, I think I've had some coaches tell me, I remember I had a coordinator tell me that his coach, this guy was not a good head coach. Well, actually, he had some moments. People on the staff questioned what he did all day. Like they had no clue. Honestly, they joked that he was playing solitaire or playing, games on his computer. I guess he had been caught one time doing that. So that was kind of an inside joke. If you're at the office 18 hours a day and you're in the office a lot by yourself, not dealing with the players or not dealing with your coaches, I do think it's fair to question, what are you actually doing? It would be pretty easy to get lazy in that spot. It would, right? Especially if you were having some success, like your team was good. What are you actually doing? Hey, John, you keep saying you have interviews coming up for football's offseason. You should try to get Mike Tomlin. Howard keeps saying he would love to get him on his show. You should beat him to it. Well, one thing I know, when these guys go on vacation, Tomlin, you name it, any football coach or football GM, they ain't doing podcasts, especially with someone like me. So Mike Tomlin, who I do not know, never met the guy, I would love to have him on. Cam Hayward, who came on last year, who I plan hopefully have again on over the next month of the offseason. But I also understand it's like his offseason too. You know, if I'm one of those guys, I remember the one time I've heard Tomlin, or I've heard him on a couple podcasts. He went on Ryan Clark's. Ryan Clark played for him, and Sean McVay's. So it's like, I understand a guy like that, you know, I'm less likely to get him. And I also often say about this, like my show specifically, is one thing I've really tried to do. And listen, is it to my benefit? Should I go after some big guests? Yeah, I probably should. But every podcast basically has a guest on. One thing I like to do, and whether this is the right business move or not, you could probably pick holes in it. I've just not really had guests. Tried to give my opinions for an hour, hour and a half, 45 minutes, whatever. Every single podcast I listen to, guest coming up, which is fun. I like listening to some of those. And I need to have some of them on because not much is going to go on over the next month. Hence why I'm doing a mailbag right now. But like one thing I've really tried to do for my show from basically the start of football season up until the draft is like, I can handle it myself. And like you come to hear me. Now, if, you know, I get a guest that's worth having on or someone that I really want to talk to, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I got some guys that I'm kind of interested in talking to. Mike Tomlin would definitely be one. If you know Mike, tell him we'd love to have him on. Levi, am I the only one who doesn't think McAfee to ESPN will change his show at all? He seems like the typical former player who always takes the player side and is against the league and the owners. Seems like the only reason people think he's unfiltered and raw is because he cusses. If you take that away, his takes seem to line up perfectly with that of ESPN guys are always saying. Am I crazy? I like Pat. I think when you watch his show, it's just, when I think raw, I'm with you on the swearing, but I also think he can just kind of do whatever he wants. And part of it is a lot of his guests, you know, I mean, he has really good rapport with Sham Charania and Ian Rappaport, right? Let's just use those two guys as examples. Well, think of ESPN's two of their biggest employees, Woj and Schefter. Like, he's going to keep having Shams on against Woj when ESPN's paying him $10 million, or he's going to have Rapsheet on when Schefter, I mean, is arguably the greatest newsbreaker in the history of the league. I love Adam. I like Ian too, but that's just part of the deal. That's where I think you start getting into some issues. One thing on the cussing, and I've tried to be cognizant of that, you know, moving forward, because I know some of you guys have little kids, you listen to me, but I talk like I talk, you know, and I try to be careful about that because I don't need to say an F word every other sentence, but it comes out sometimes, it comes out. And that is 100%. If he's on ESPN2 or ESPN or whatever, it is not going to be allowed. It's legally just not allowed. You're not allowed to swear on ESPN. So I hear you. That's a huge difference. I saw someone comment on, you know, sometimes when the volume, they cut up what I say, right, and put it out as social clips. And one of the social clip that came out on Monday was my take on Saquon Barkley, how the Giants, you know, have been really good business partners. They've paid him $38 million. And if he signs his franchise tag, he'll have made $8 million over 6 years, which is pretty damn good, given what he's brought to the table, been injured a lot. Had some awesome moments, very talented player. I guess ultimately my take is it's been a win-win. And someone's like, Middlekauff always takes the side of the teams. No, I look at things very objectively. And I do think a lot of former players do have a hard time just going, that's a terrible contract. Or that's stupid to not release this player. Or you need to sign this guy because he's some former big name. And I clearly don't do that because I look and I was trained from a front office point of view. Plus, I just think about things logically. If Saquon, like I wouldn't advocate over the last couple of years, you know what? Derrick Henry, not worth it to the Titans. Of course he is. But I do think you could make an argument. Would the Giants be that much different if you just put a solid running back on their team or multiple running backs that made a combined $3 million instead of paying Saquon 10? I'm not pro or anti any of these guys. I just look at every situation individually, independently. and make a decision. Where most former players, which I understand, they always looked at things through the lens of being in the locker room going, we're getting screwed. And sometimes you're just not getting screwed. It's why I appreciate guys that make a lot of money that are just easy to deal with. Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, just feels like pretty seamless. Now, you could argue, of course it was. They were offered enormous amounts of money. But that's just a high-level business partnership on both sides. I have a hard time thinking players that were drafted super high that have made a lot of money are just getting completely railroaded. They may be quote-unquote underpaid, right? But even Nick Bosa, he's made $40 million the last 4 years or whatever. Or I guess he will after the end of his fifth-year option. But he's going to get extended. But he's been paid a lot of money. Now, relative to top defensive ends, yeah, of course not. He's at his position, he's a $25 million player. But there have been guys that are mid-round picks that start playing at a Pro Bowl level, like Max Crosby. Think about it. It's one thing to get screwed making $8, $9, $10 million. Another thing to be like, God, I'm a Pro Bowler and I'm making $780,000. So I just try to put things in perspective where I think other former players have a hard time doing that. And I think Pat, I've seen him enough be able to take both sides. But yeah, think who's on a show. AJ, Pat, and Pac-Man Jones. What do you think their perspective is going to be? Do you know that Angie's List is now Angie, your home for everything home? Listen, as someone who's been looking to buy a place and wants to do big projects once I do close on a house, I don't know where to start. Who am I going to contact? Angie can help you get the best price for your product. They have access to hundreds of thousands of pros, and they make it easy to research, compare, and hire pros to ensure the job is done well. And here's the other thing. The pros in their network are locally based. They have been rated and reviewed by others in your area who have actually used their service. In just a few taps in the Angie app or clicks on the website, you can have Angie tackle your home service project start to finish. How awesome does that sound? Here's the thing. Download the free Angie mobile app today or visit Angie.com. That's ANGI.com. The third quarterback rule had me thinking. Can you explain more about how in a season's NFL roster works? There's 53-man roster, but also practice squad, but not all 53 dress on game day. Thanks. So on game day, well, during the season, right? When the date changes. It could be September 1st, September 2nd, whatever the day is, you have to cut down your roster. It used to be from like 90 to 80 to 75 to 53. I think now it goes like 90 to 80 and then 80 to 53. I'm pretty sure. I might have that. Maybe it goes 90 to 75. You have some different cut down dates. There are specific dates, how many people you can have on your roster. And when the season starts, you officially have to get down to 53 men on your roster. If you're one of those 53 guys, you are on the team and paid your salary as an NFL player. So if you're the 7th round pick, you're probably making league minimum, which if you're a rookie, it's like $750,000, $800,000, whatever. If I make the team as a veteran and I don't have any, quote unquote guaranteed money, but my regular salary is $5 million and I make that 53-man roster, if I'm on the roster week 1 and I play in that game, or I don't play in the game, but I'm just on the roster, I'm getting that $5 million no matter what, and it's guaranteed. And then obviously the good players are making the team. So you have 53 men. But just because you make the team, right, if you don't have any guaranteed money or you get injured, I can always remove you from the roster, right? We have the ability to put you on injured reserve. Those rules have been pretty fluid over the last couple of years, right? It used to be you went on injured reserve, you never came back. Then they changed the rule to like one guy can come back. Then they changed the rule, 3 guys can come back. I'd have to Google what exactly the rule is now. I think it even changed from last year. Remember they had some like maybe 3 guys you can put on and bring back over the course of the season. I never quite understood this, but it surely has to do with money. On game day, you can only have 45 players, right? So even though you're on the roster, there's a decent chance, and you see it, anybody that follows their team, on game day when the inactives come out and 8 guys are on the inactive list, you get a bunch of guys that are just there on sweats. It's the difference in college and the pro. When you look at a college sideline, right? Like when Michigan or Alabama, whoever plays at home week 1, there are people everywhere because you got 100+ guys on the team. In the NFL, you only actually have 53 guys on the team. So when you have 8 guys in sweats and your practice squad guys, who I guess at home are usually on the field too, they've expanded that. It used to be like 6 guys, then it went to 8. I'm pretty sure it's 10. But as a practice squad guy, I don't make as much money. So as a practice squad guy, I think, again, this number's changed too. I'd have to look it up. Maybe it's 120 grand. Nothing's guaranteed. So I can cut you at any moment. Now, week to week, you make whatever, 10 grand or 12 grand. I guess maybe it's a little less than that. 8,500. I don't know the exact breakdown. I have to look it up. But you are zero money's guaranteed, right? I can, if I want to cut down at the end of training camp to 53 guys, but there are a couple guys that I want to put on my practice squad. And once you go through the practice squad, you have to clear waivers, meaning any team in the league can claim you. Well, a lot of teams, once you clear waivers to make sure that you stay with them, basically pay you like you're on the 53-man roster, but you're on the practice squad. So some guys throughout the league on a practice squad may make 500 grand. Hell, may make a full rookie minimum salary, right? No different than like the 5th rounder that made the team. But the third quarterback rule is basically saying that instead of 8 guys inactive, you get 7 guys inactive, and the one guy, a 46 guy on game day, can be the quarterback. So the overwhelming majority of teams, when you're building that 53-man roster, keep 2 quarterbacks, which you could argue is crazy, is ballsy, whatever. And usually the third quarterback is on the practice squad. Now, I think teams are going to be more inclined to keep 3 quarterbacks on the 53-man roster. And sometimes you need 3 guys that are worthy of it. Like last year, the 49ers, when they re-signed Jimmy Garoppolo, they kept Brock Purdy on the active roster. But so week 1, for example, before Trey Lance got hurt, when they flew to Chicago, Trey Lance was a starter, Jimmy Garoppolo was the backup, and Brock Purdy was just standing there in sweats. But he was not, he made the team. He just, if Trey Lance had gotten injured and Jimmy had gotten in, they don't have another quarterback. Now, every team in the NFL will go into a game with a third guy, right? And they'll usually put that guy. It's why I think most teams are going to keep 3 quarterbacks on the 53-man roster. I know I talked a lot there, so it's pretty confusing because it doesn't make that much sense. Why can't the NFL, I don't know the answer to this, just have all 53 guys on your roster all dressed up on game day? It's usually an extra D lineman, an extra offensive lineman, an extra running back, an extra DB. It's usually a quarterback, right? Why can't all those guys be dressed on game day? I'm sure it has to do with some money issues with the owners, but I've always thought that was really, really stupid. Why is there so much love for Sean Payton and the disrespect for Mike McCarthy? Their win, loss, and playoff records are identical. The McCarthy only won 1 Super Bowl with a Hall of Fame quarterback in Rodgers can also be said about Payton with Drew Brees. Granted, Rodgers was a better quarterback, but harder to coach, in my opinion. I would agree to that. He was a lot better. There's a big gap, right? I mean, there's a wide gap. Steph Curry's a Hall of Famer. John Stockton's a Hall of Famer. There's a wide gap in the two. Like Drew Brees, respect Drew Brees. Aaron Rodgers is in a different universe than Drew Brees. McCarthy took all the heat when the Packers moved off Favre and didn't have an NFL-mandated 1-year suspension. What am I missing? A lot has to do with PR campaign. Definitely has a lot to do with the PR campaign. Sean Payton's always been very, very good with the media. He's very good friends with a lot of people in the media. He went to work in the media and seamlessly transitioned pretty easily. I think that plays a pretty big role. Sean Payton has consistently called plays, feels like most of his career. I could be wrong, Saints fans, that maybe there were some years when, did he give that up to any of those guys over the years? I feel like he called them the whole time. Remember, Mike McCarthy went through some stretches in Green Bay where he gave it up, took it back. Is there something to McCarthy's look? I don't know. I mean, Andy's big and people like him. Maybe he's not as tactful the way he deals with the media. I wonder if it's simply like a huge reason is the way that he deals with the press and deals in the press conferences, not as smooth. I find him pretty enjoyable. I got no issues with McCarthy. One thing that can't be argued, a lot of bad playoff losses. A lot of bad playoff losses. In Green Bay, some terrible playoff losses. I mean, gut wrenchers with Rodgers. Sean Payton's had him too. I was like, Drew Brees can't even throw deep, right? McCarthy, think about his 2 years ago in Dallas, home game against the 49ers. Kind of got worked. Home game against the Niners got worked. I know the game ended up being close. It wasn't that close. That was a pretty bad loss. But I hear you. If numbers speak for themselves. I think if you polled every GM in the NFL and you said, would you rather have Mike McCarthy or Sean Payton? And you get to, run the draft and you get to keep your power. So it doesn't infringe on your control. I feel like Sean Payton would probably be like 85, 90. I remember I had a buddy that offensive coach in the league who never worked with Sean Payton, loved him. Just thought he was a genius. His concepts, how good he was at designing offenses. I don't know if people talk about McCarthy like that. Fair or not, I don't know. 2 years ago in the NFL, I think the Cowboys were the number one offense when the year they lost in the 49ers. He wasn't the offensive coordinator.